Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we dig in deep to analyze the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. I'm Andy Nelson from thenextreel.com.
And I'm Pete Wright, also from thenextreel.com.
And we are back with more of Favreau's Iron Man. Today we dig into minute 3, which starts with Tony spilling the deets about his Playboy lifestyle and ends with Tony left and abandoned in the Humvee with little Jimmy telling him to stay.
Little Jimmy.
Aww.
You say it's so sweet. Like, it's so sweet.
Don't you? He's a very sweet little boy.
Yes.
Little Jimmy, little Kevin
Jimmy.
Foster.
I think that is the big lesson, actually, for me. In all seriousness, the way these guys change from these awestruck, kind of fawning fanboys of Tony Stark to, we're soldiers now, this is our job, and the way Tony, tries to stay cool. As he says, wait, what do we got? What do we got? With total fear on his face is the best moment of this minute. It feels like we've been podcasting about this thing for already, about an hour. And man, has it taken a long time for stuff to actually happen.
Well, you say that, but here we are. We're 2.5 minutes into the film and stuff starts getting blown up. It does not take long for this film to kick into action. And I think that's actually a strength of the movie. And I'm actually looking forward to talking about in a couple more minutes when things shift a little bit. But for now, I'm thrilled that we're in the middle of this firefight in Afghanistan as people are getting killed. We've got, Ramirez. She's the first to die in the film.
She says contact left, and then her door opens and she sort of falls to the ground and you kind of hear a grunt. And I know that you think maybe she got shot, but in the back of my head, she's still there. She's alive. They didn't go back and get her. Can we make that happen?
Wow, this is dark all of a sudden. Ramirez is just lying in the desert now.
All your heroes are dead, Andy. I don't know if we've talked about that enough.
So, yeah, Ramirez, the last line that she has in the film, contact left. The last thing she gets to say as she jumps out the door to her left and gets shot. It's like maybe
in hindsight, that was not a great idea.
Maybe she shouldn't have gotten out that door.
Ramirez, the only character who has no gift of hindsight.
Oh, dear. Pratt, he's the second to die. That's Garrett Noel's character.
Yes.
And he's the one who says, Jimmy, stay with Stark, as he gets out. And then Stark watches him as he sets up on over the hood of the Humvee and then gets taken down as the windshield gets kind of blown apart. And
right.
Stark has that great moment where he's checking himself, did I just get hit from that?
And then Jimmy himself, the last out of the car, who, again, very soldierly, grabs Stark's shoulder and says, stay here, and also jumps out of the car in the same direction that Ramirez went, to the left. Lessons not learned.
Well, we don't know. He might have learned his lesson.
That's a good point.
We don't find out.
This ends on quite a cliffhanger, this minute.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the last thing that Tony says to Jimmy as Jimmy gets out of the car is he screams to him, give me a gun, which is so interesting because, yes, these are these military guys who are going out to fight. And yes, we've seen Tony as this playboy, but he is a weapons manufacturer, and that's his job. So it makes perfect sense for him to say, give me a gun. It's actually kind of surprising that he doesn't have a gun on him.
I guess it is, but I think that's one of the things that lights me up about this minute is that we get to see Tony in an actual firefight in the first 3 minutes of the movie. Because he's the guy who doesn't look like he belongs there, right? He doesn't appear to be a guy who's equipped to be there. He's got the fine glassware with his drink. He's got the suit and the tie and the fancy glasses. He doesn't fit in that Humvee. He's very cool to those other guys. But when explosions start to erupt around him, you can see that sort of shock and awe on his face that he may truly not be living up to the promise of being able to truck there. I think that's really good because we have to be able to see him here. We have to be able to see some fear. We have to be able to see the risk of his life that we know is coming in order to buy the transformation from Tony Stark into Iron Man.
Well, and we also have to remember the way that the film is structured at this point in the film, if you're walking into this without having any backstory, you don't know that he's a weapons manufacturer. It's a really interesting setup because we've got a very kind of odd scene with this kind of this rich playboy in this military Humvee driving through Afghanistan. It seems like, okay, so who are these guys babysitting is really the way that the film sets it up. We have no idea his backstory that is in weapons. And so it's actually a good point that it might be a little more awkward if he did have a weapon on him.
Yeah, I think so.
You know, we should jump backward a little bit because we're talking about kind of the ending of the minute, but it actually starts finishing Pratt's question that he had. Did Stark go 12 for 12 with last year's Maxim cover models? Again, very not #MeToo, but still, I think this is actually a great conversation to have about setting up this unlikable character that Stan Lee wanted to create that was kind of against everything that comic readers would like back in the 60s because he was a military guy. He was this rich playboy. It's not what people wanted to see. And that was kind of the challenge that he had for himself and his team, is making this unlikable character become a superhero. And I think they do a great job giving that job to Robert Downey Jr. in this scene in particular.
It's almost as much fun as the Walter White transformation. You know what I mean? Like if we could see him, the birth of a supervillain, in this case, the birth of a superhero, we have to see him at his worst. And in so many ways, we have to see the sexism. We have to see that he's, that he's able to have these conversations and that his behavior lives up to those conversations later in the movie that I've maybe not seen. Who knows? And so, we have to see that darkness in order to buy change, in order to make it actually, I think, hard for us to buy change. Because when that change is hard for us to rationalize, when we finally rationalize it, it actually, we actually, I think, have a stronger connection with it.
Well, to that point also, there's that save the cat dance that they're doing here. But, there's that screenwriting philosophy about, you can have as nasty a protagonist as you want in your film, as long as they do something early on in the film that, like saving a cat, that your audience can connect with. Mm-hmm. And yes, Tony Stark is kind of this obnoxious prat of a playboy, and it's kind of everything you hate in rich, obnoxious people like this. But he's so charming. There's something so casual and charming and disarming that the way that he warms up this Jeep and makes it all of a sudden comfortable place to kind of have a conversation in. That's what it is that is that saving the cat moment, I guess you could say.
All right. Now, did you want to read any from the script that we have?
That's actually a good point to bring up. We hadn't really talked about the writers for the movie yet, and I thought it would be worth bringing up. The draft that they ended up shooting with was the Salmon draft. The way that screenwriting works is once the script is locked, every time there's a revision, those revised pages get a different color. And there's a set number of pages. It goes from the white draft to, then it would go blue, pink, yellow, green, goldenrod, buff, salmon, cherry, tan. And then it starts repeating that color pattern. And this is actually the Salmon number 2 draft, technically, which was the first draft was locked on January 24th, 2007. The Salmon number 2 draft, sometime later than that. The Buff number 2, which is right before Salmon number 2, was May 9th, and Salmon number 2 is just listed as XXXX07. The draft was credited on the front page as written by Matt Holloway and Art Markham, and that's an ampersand, meaning they collaborated together, and not collaborating, Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby. That was another collaborating pair. Based on the Marvel comic, revisions by Matt Holloway and Art Markham, Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby, and John August, and then current revisions by Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby. So you can kind of get a sense of how things unfolded there. But on IMDb, on the WGA listing, John August gets no credit for contributing to the film. I guess his writing contribution was not high enough.
Well, that's all right. He had big fish.
There's always big fish. Yes.
I will always have big fish. I I find it interesting. We wanted to talk a little bit about the writing, and because this is a sequence where we get a little bit of a different gag from Salmon 2.
It's interesting, just as far as the photography gag, and this goes to kind of a little bit of how this script was they were still scrambling, trying to get all the pages, finished of all these different drafts as they were in production, trying to kind of finalize it and figure it out. And so Favreau really allowed some improv on set. And Robert Downey Jr., of course, is one of those guys who just is natural at that sort of stuff. And a moment that exemplifies that is when Jimmy asks if he can have his picture taken with him. And we get a totally different conversation between the script and what happens in the movies. Pratt actually asks if he can take a picture with him. And Tony says, "Are you aware that Native Americans believe photographs steal a little piece of your soul?" And then there's a beat. He says, "Not to worry, mine's long gone. Fire away."
And it's that fire away that actually leads us into this massive explosion after the photo is taken, right? That's the last line, and then the explosion hits and the windshield blows up into this fireball.
Right.
I think that's really interesting. It's an interesting change. I do like the gag, the way it plays out, better with the gang sign. Put it down. That's okay. Put it up. I don't want to, I actually think that's funnier.
Well, plus the whole MySpace gag, which is very timely.
Yes.
I think it's just so funny. I was reading about MySpace. It was launched in 2003, and then it was actually from 2005 until early 2008. It was the most visited social networking site in the world, attracting 75.9 million unique visitors a month at its 2008 peak, shortly after which it was overtaken by Facebook. And this film came out the summer of 2008. So it's just funny that this line in the film hits right as MySpace peaks and Facebook takes over.
Wow. And what's really funny about that is that coming on this movie 10 years later, now that joke's actually funny. Or now I should say it's actually a joke.
Yeah, right.
Isn't it funny what time does?
It totally is. Yeah, because back then saying, "I don't want to see this on your MySpace page," that's not the joke. The joke was, "No, I'm just kidding. Throw up your gang signs."
That's right.
That kind of was the joke. But now the whole MySpace thing is just as funny.
I think that's a riot. So Favreau, we talked about Favreau a little bit yesterday. Favreau's an interesting guy. It's one of those things we talked about him not necessarily having a logical, place here early in the Marvel universe, but in fact he did. He was in Daredevil.
Yeah, he was actually in it, and it's funny that that just didn't click with either of us. That he actually had been Foggy in the 2003 Daredevil film, and that's where he met the Marvel team and Avi Arad, and became kind of had an opportunity to express his passion for it, and here we are.
I think it's great, even though, and it's a funny thing about that movie in particular, that it doesn't seem to have the sort of the legs of history in this universe, but it did some things really. Some really smart things around that superhero, even though it wasn't an altogether terrific film. And I miss it a little bit.
Don't know if I could say that, but I don't know enough about the Daredevil character or kind of that world to say, oh, they did that well or not well.
Well, they clearly went back and fixed the problems they thought they had with their Netflix partnership.
Yeah.
But anyhow, it was interesting. And it's interesting to see that happens to be the door that Favreau kicks in to get into the Marvel sphere.
As a supporting character.
Yeah.
In one of their lesser
It could
respected
happen
films.
to anyone.
Right. Now I want to see, let's see, who is one of the lesser, maybe it'll be Aquaman. He'll be directing the next big, the final breakout for the real DCU.
The effects in this sequence are, they look hot. Very hot.
Yeah, this is, we're seeing some actual fireballs here. It's nice to see that it's not all just CG, but we actually are getting some stuff blowing up. And it's nice. I think the effects team, they clearly are having a good time. And it's a great surprising moment in the minute here when all of a sudden we get this, we're totally not paying attention to kind of what's happening out in front because they're arguing about the camera. and all of a sudden the vehicle in front just totally blows up. And it's a fantastic, cut, a series of cuts to kind of exemplify that. And we don't get out of the Jeep, the Humvee here really a whole lot, but I think what they do effectively through this whole firefight, and this is something that we'll definitely see in the next minute, this is kind of an indie war scene, right? We stay with Tony, and because of that, we don't really get this sense of the scope, but through the sound design and everything, it feels like we're in the thick of it.
It does. Do we know who was responsible for these practical effects? I mean, I know it's the usual house, ILM, the embassy, the orphanage, New Deal Studios. It really does give us a sense of war zone. And what I think is super interesting about this particular one is at the time, the great fear of driving across Afghanistan were these, improvised explosive devices, were these kind of, these attacks that come out of nowhere, were these, great surprises. And this is one of them, right? This is the thing that we get to sort of live through. I think it makes it really scary.
It really does. And they do a great job of making you feel that way. And I don't know who was responsible for the practical effects on set.
Yeah.
I was just trying to go through it's a ridiculously long list. And so many people are credited as special effects technician.
Yeah.
There are a few like special effects foremen, and maybe it's them, like Eric Cook, he was one, Todd Jensen as another one. I don't know if they are the ones who are really in charge of all of this sort of stuff and the pyro effects and all of that. But it is a huge effects team when you get into these sorts of projects. And they're, I guess they're doing a great job with what they are, what they're responsible for.
Well, here we go. That would be John P. Kaizen, pyrotechnician.
Oh, yeah. There
Look
you go.
at him.
Kazin?
Kazin?
Yeah. I don't know.
Chazin.
Kazin, but he is the pyro man.
He's the pyro man. He's done a lot of stuff, and in fact, it looks like we're going to talk about him again in about 6 years.
Looking forward to it. The only other thing that I was going to throw out there is I was trying to figure out, I don't think I ever got a good sense of where Tony was in this convoy. And I think watching these minutes, I finally figured out that he's in the middle one, which I guess makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a convoy of 5 vehicles, and of course he would be right in the middle. And the first vehicle that we see get blown up is the second vehicle. The first and last vehicles in the convoy we've already seen have men sticking out the tops, manning the guns. And so that was my clue to kind of try figuring out what's going on here.
Well, it's good, and it gives you a sense of space in a future minute. I can't wait to see that minute.
I can't either. Well, everybody, that's it for this week's show. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the show for free at marvelmovieminute.com. Join us over in our Discord chat room and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Next Reel. And if you like what we do and want to support us and get some cool stuff, become a patron over at patreon.com/thenextreel. That's it, everybody. Until next time, true believers.